Dr. Alvarez had screened hundreds of participants for cognitive research over her decade at the institute, but nothing in her career prepared her for the intake file, now glowing on her tablet. At first, it looked routine: name, age, medical history, standard consent forms. Then she reached the autobiographical memory index and froze. The file contained a list of life events: first bike ride, a chipped front tooth from falling on a driveway, the smell of her grandmother's apartment, the night sky over Porto during a childhood summer. And they weren't just familiar. They were hers. Not similar, not coincidentally overlapping. Exact, down to the way the memory of the chipped tooth included the metallic taste of blood on her tongue and the sound of her father's panicked footsteps on concrete. She scrolled again, half expecting to see some error tag or researcher note about a data merge, but instead found an embedded video clip labeled Subject Narrative, Session 0. She tapped it. The feed showed a man in his late 20s, sitting under bright overhead lights, eyes flicking nervously toward the camera. "I know these memories aren't mine," he said in a voice edged with quiet panic, "but they feel like they are. The earliest one is the day my father carried me inside after I fell off a red bicycle in the driveway. My tooth was bleeding. I remember my mother crying." Dr. Alvarez's breath stalled. She set the tablet down, checked the subject code again. No match to her own. Then reread the consent form. This was supposed to be an evaluation for a new branch of the archive project, something about transferring and cataloging episodic memory fragments for therapeutic reconstruction. But this was different. When she arrived in interview room 4, the man was already there, hands resting on the table, a trace of uncertainty in his posture, as though he'd been coached not to appear afraid. "Mr. Cade," she began, keeping her tone measured, "I've reviewed your file. Can you tell me how you came to be part of this study?" He gave a humorless laugh. "They told me I volunteered. I don't remember doing that. In fact, the last week is gone. But I keep waking up with dreams that aren't dreams. They're yours, aren't they?" The air between them seemed to shift, a silent acknowledgement that neither of them should be saying these things aloud. She glanced toward the observation mirror, knowing full well there were people, maybe even people she knew, watching from the other side. "You're certain these memories aren't your own?" she asked, partly to keep him talking, partly to buy time. "Certain," he said. "But I can't tell where you end and I begin anymore." Dr. Alvarez felt the pull of professional detachment straining against something more primal, the violation of realizing parts of her life had been extracted, copied, and implanted into a stranger. She wanted to demand answers, to march down to the archive's central server room and tear open the encrypted drives herself. But she also knew the rules. Knowledge was compartmentalized, and stepping outside her assigned role could mean losing her position, her credentials, and possibly her freedom. "Mr. Cade," she said finally, "there are protocols we have to follow. I need you to recount the most recent memory you believe isn't yours." He closed his eyes, and in a voice that made her skin crawl, he described a quiet moment at age 15, standing on the balcony of her old apartment, staring down at the empty street at midnight, listening for footsteps that never came. It was a memory she had never told anyone. That was when the overhead light flickered, once, twice, and a soft knock came from the observation door. A woman in a gray suit stepped inside without introduction. "We'll take it from here," she told Dr. Alvarez, her voice sharp but polite. "The subject requires isolation." Cade's chair scraped as he half rose, eyes wide. "No, she's the only one who understands." Dr. Alvarez felt an almost physical urge to refuse, to plant herself between him and the suited woman. But she hesitated, just long enough for 2 orderlies to appear and guide Cade out. As he passed her, he leaned close enough that only she could hear. "They'll erase this from you next. Don't let them." The door shut. The observation window went black. And in the sudden quiet, Dr. Alvarez realized her own memory of the chipped tooth was already beginning to blur at the edges. The following morning, Dr. Alvarez found her access credentials downgraded. The research logs she normally reviewed over coffee were gone from her terminal, the usual internal memos replaced by a sterile notification: "Clearance pending review." She tried to request restoration, citing the ongoing assessment of subject Cade, but the system's response was immediate and final: "Access denied." She stared at the screen for several seconds, listening to the faint hum of the overhead lights, aware that this kind of administrative lockout usually preceded either reassignment or a disciplinary review. Neither boded well. She decided not to confront the director directly. Not yet. Instead, she made her way to Sublevel 3, where physical intake records were kept in the vault-like archive room. That floor was mostly deserted. The handful of technicians who passed her in the corridor avoided eye contact. At the archive desk, an older clerk with thinning hair and a distracted manner asked for her badge. His scanner beeped twice, then displayed a red bar. "You're not cleared for this level," he said without much interest, as if reading from a script. "I was here yesterday," Alvarez replied, keeping her voice neutral. "My clearance hasn't changed." "It has now," he said, turning back to his console. She hesitated only a moment before slipping a folded paper across the counter. A requisition slip for another project entirely, something harmless and non-sensitive. When he reached for it, she quickly added, "And while you're at it, could you pull the visitor logs for interview room 4 from yesterday? I think there's been a mix-up with my report." The clerk frowned but typed in the request. After a moment, he glanced at her and said, "Logs show no visitor under that subject code." "That's impossible. Not according to the system." She thanked him, masking her frustration, and stepped into the elevator. If the logs had been wiped, it meant someone was already sanitizing the record. Cade's presence was being erased, and by extension, so was her interaction with him. Back in her office, she found an unmarked envelope on her desk. Inside was a single, small object, a black data key, the kind used to transfer encrypted memory files between secure terminals. No note, no signature, just the faint smell of ozone clinging to the plastic. She locked the door, powered down her main terminal, and booted the offline laptop she kept for personal work. The data key contained a single folder labeled Echo_43. Inside, a series of video files, each time-stamped over the last year, showing different subjects in interview rooms, some pleading, some silent, some speaking in precise detail about lives that clearly weren't their own. One, an elderly woman, described the birth of a child in a language she didn't speak. Another, a teenage boy, recalled the funeral of a spouse he'd never had. And in the last file, Cade sat in the same room she'd met him in, looking calmer than before, saying, "It's not just memories they're moving. It's the weight of them. They're giving pieces of us to people who can't live with their own pasts." Alvarez replayed the line twice. The weight of them. She'd read about early archive experiments that involved memory therapy for trauma patients, allowing them to replace unbearable events with neutral or pleasant ones. But the official protocols required full consent and extensive psychological screening. What Cade implied was far riskier, forcibly offloading emotional burdens onto unwitting recipients. The ethical implications were staggering. A sharp knock rattled her door. She yanked the data key from the port and slipped it into her lab coat pocket just as the door opened. It was Dr. Sue, one of the senior coordinators, carrying a folder so thin it could only mean trouble. "Marina," he said, using her first name in that patronizing tone reserved for bad news delivered gently. "We're reassigning you to the retrieval unit. Effective immediately." "That's not my department." "It is now. Temporary measure." He set the folder on her desk. "You'll report to Sublevel 6 at 0900 tomorrow. Until then, I suggest you rest." His pause made the words sound like a warning. After he left, she opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet outlining her new duties, overseeing the extraction of high-fidelity memory sequences from terminated subjects. She felt her stomach knot. Terminated didn't mean deceased in archive terminology. It meant cut off, removed from the experiment, often with cognitive scars that never healed. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept seeing Cade's eyes, the quiet urgency in his voice. If the archive was moving not just memories but the emotional gravity attached to them, it wasn't therapy, it was redistribution of pain. And the fact that her own memories were involved meant she wasn't just a researcher anymore. She was part of the experiment, possibly from the beginning. Shortly after midnight, her phone vibrated with an unknown number. She considered ignoring it, then answered. A distorted voice said, "Sublevel 6 has blind spots. West Corridor, between chambers 3 and 4. If you want answers, be there before your shift." "Who is this?" she asked, but the line had already gone dead. She sat in the dark for several minutes, the phone still in her hand. She knew this could be a trap, maybe even a loyalty test. But she also knew one thing. In less than 10 hours, she'd be deep inside the most restricted part of the archive, with no guarantee she'd come back the same. Marina arrived at sublevel 6 30 minutes before her shift, a deliberate violation of her reassignment order. The elevator ride down was unnervingly long. Each passing floor indicated only by a faint click in the shaft. When the doors opened, she was met with a dry, recycled air that carried a faint metallic taste. The corridor lights here were dimmer than on the upper floors, casting long shadows that swayed with the hum of unseen ventilation. She turned left, counting the numbered chambers on the wall, until she reached the narrow gap between 3 and 4. It looked unremarkable, just an alcove with a sealed maintenance hatch and a panel of outdated wiring. She waited, hands in her coat pockets, aware that the cameras overhead weren't tracking her. They didn't move at all, frozen in a fixed angle, as if purposely disabled. A minute later, footsteps approached from the far end. A man in an archive security uniform appeared, tall and broad-shouldered, but his cap was pulled low and his badge bore no name. Without slowing, he walked past her, slipped a folded card into her pocket, and kept moving until he vanished around the corner. She stepped back into the alcove and unfolded the card. It was an old key card, deactivated for standard systems, but taped to it was a handwritten note. Observation Bay 7B. Use manual lock. 10 minutes. She knew 7B, a disused bay originally built for behavioral monitoring during early-stage trials. Officially shut down 5 years ago, it was still wired into the archive's lower-level maintenance grid, meaning certain doors could be opened without alerting central security. Navigating there took longer than expected. Several hallways had been sealed off, forcing her through storage areas where inactive retrieval pods sat covered in white tarps like sleeping giants. She reached 7B with 3 minutes to spare and found the manual lock mechanism hidden behind a loose wall panel. The keycard slid in and turned with a satisfying click. Inside, the bay was dark except for the faint glow of a portable lamp. Cade was there, sitting on a steel chair, his wrists free but his posture tense. His face lit up briefly when he saw her. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "Neither was I," she replied, closing the door behind her. "You said they're moving more than memories." He nodded, glancing toward the lamp as if it might be listening. "You know how some people can't carry certain things, guilt, grief, trauma, without breaking? The archive figured out that if you remove those memories but leave the weight behind, it can be transferred to someone stronger, or to someone who doesn't even realize what they're feeling isn't theirs. That's not therapy," she said quietly. "It's redistribution, emotional waste management, and it's profitable." Her mind reeled. Why would anyone volunteer for that? "They don't," Cade said. "Not anymore. The early subjects signed up for treatment, but when they realized what was happening, they started refusing. So the archive adjusted the process. People disappear into research programs without public record. Memories get stripped, redistributed, and the host never knows why they can't sleep, why they wake up crying for no reason. Meanwhile, someone else walks away lighter, cleaner. She wanted to argue, to demand proof, but the videos on the data key flashed in her mind, especially the elderly woman speaking a language she didn't know. "Why tell me?" "Because you're one of them," he said, his voice steady. "I've seen your file. 3 years ago, you underwent what they called an immersive empathy calibration. Do you remember that?" She did. A training program meant to help researchers better connect with patients. A harmless simulation, or so she believed. "They didn't calibrate you," Cade continued. "They loaded you, gave you grief that wasn't yours. You've been carrying it ever since." Her breath caught, but before she could respond, the door handle rattled. Both froze. She reached for the lamp, ready to kill the light, but the door swung open and the man in the security uniform stepped inside. He removed his cap, revealing sharp features and tired eyes. "Dr. Alvarez," he said, voice low but urgent. "We don't have time for disbelief. My name's Rios. I work security, but not for them. There's a group outside the archive trying to shut this down. You've been flagged as containment priority, which means they'll either lock you in permanent retrieval duty or wipe you clean. I can get you out, but you'll have to see what's in the core first." Cade looked between them. "You can't just walk her into the core. It's suicide." It's worse if she stays ignorant, Rios replied. Marina swallowed hard. What's in the core? The repository, Rios said. The full ledger. Every transfer, every subject, every recipient. Once you see it, you'll understand why they'll kill to protect it. A distant alarm began to wail, not loud yet, but growing. Rios stepped forward, handing her a small device no bigger than a coin. Wear this. It'll scramble your clearance logs for about 5 minutes. After that, you're on your own. The alarm intensified, echoing through the bay like a pulse. Somewhere above, automated doors slammed shut. Rios glanced toward the hallway. Decision time, Doctor. Stay and be erased, or come and learn exactly what they've done to you. Her hands tightened around the device. She thought of the data key in her pocket, the erased logs, the heavy grief she'd carried without knowing why. She met Cade's eyes, and for the first time, he didn't look like a subject. He looked like someone who knew her better than she knew herself. Let's go, she said. Rios smiled grimly. Then keep close. And don't look at anyone in the pods. The route to the core was nothing like Marina expected. Instead of sterile corridors and white lights, Rios led them through service ducts, cramped maintenance shafts, and lift cages that shook as if they hadn't been serviced in years. The alarms never stopped, shifting in tone like a warning that adapted to their location. They passed only 2 people, both unconscious in the hall, slumped against walls with no visible injuries. Rios didn't explain, and she didn't ask. Every so often, she caught Cade watching her, as if trying to gauge whether she believed any of this. She wanted to tell him that disbelief wasn't the problem. The problem was how easily the pieces were fitting together. The gaps in her memory, the sudden waves of sorrow she'd never been able to explain, the moment during the empathy calibration when she'd felt something tear loose inside her mind. All of it had the same origin. And if Rios was right, the proof was just ahead. They reached a heavy blast door marked with hazard symbols. Rios pressed his palm to a hidden panel, and a narrow gap opened just wide enough for them to slip through. Inside was a descending spiral ramp with glass walls overlooking rows upon rows of cylindrical pods, each with a single occupant. At first, Marina thought they were asleep. Then she saw the subtle twitching under closed eyelids, the faint muscle spasms in their fingers. They were dreaming, not their own dreams, but someone else's. A thin lattice of wires connected each pod to a central column pulsing with blue light. This is only the perimeter, Rios whispered. The core is deeper. They descended 2 more levels before reaching a platform that extended toward the central column. A terminal there displayed a scrolling list of names, each paired with 2 numbers, extraction index and transfer target. Rios began swiping through pages. Here, subject Alvarez Marina. Extraction index 9. 7. Transfer target, Kessler, Dana. The name hit like a physical blow. Dana Kessler, her former mentor, the woman who had publicly defended Marina after a failed clinical trial nearly ended her career. The woman she'd always thought of as the only person who truly understood her work. She took it from me, Marina whispered. Not took, Rios said. Was given. You carried her guilt from that trial. She's been walking free ever since. The official records show she passed every psychological evaluation with perfect scores. And you, he stopped. His expression shifted. They've changed your file. You're marked for full retrieval. Before she could respond, the lights cut out. The glass walls went dark, hiding the pods. A metallic clunk echoed from above, followed by the hiss of pressurized doors sealing. Emergency red lighting flooded the ramp. They found us, Rios said. He yanked the device from her pocket and crushed it under his boot. No more scrambler. They'll trace us in seconds. Kate grabbed her arm. We need another way out. There is no other way, Rios said sharply. The core's extraction grid is cycling up. If you're here when it hits full power, you'll lose everything in your head. A low vibration spread through the floor. Marina's vision blurred for a moment, and she felt a pressure in her chest like someone had pressed a weight directly onto her heart. She staggered, but Cade caught her. Rios was already at the terminal, frantically entering commands. I can dump the ledger to your key, but it'll trigger a hard lock. We'll have maybe 20 seconds before. A sharp sound cut him off, a single gunshot, deafening in the enclosed space. Rios fell forward onto the terminal, a dark stain spreading across his back. Marina's breath froze. A figure stepped out from the shadows of the ramp, a woman in a gray archive coat, her face calm, almost kind. Dana Kessler. I warned them this would happen, Dana said, her tone almost mournful. You were never meant to know, Marina. You can't imagine what will happen if this ledger gets out. You stole my life, Marina said, her voice shaking. I preserved you, Dana replied softly. Do you think you could have continued your work carrying the guilt from that trial? I gave you a clean slate. I gave you purpose. The vibration deepened. A countdown began on the terminal screen, 24 seconds. Dana extended a hand. Walk away now, and I can clear your retrieval order. You can go back to your lab, your projects. All this can fade, like a bad dream. Cade whispered, she's lying. Marina looked at Dana's outstretched hand, then at Rios, motionless on the floor, then at the terminal still connected to the central column. The countdown hit 12 seconds. The night air was thick with the smell of rain, but no clouds moved above the archive's roof, only a low hum that vibrated in the bones. Marina stood in the center of the atrium, the old tiled floor wet under her boots from the leaking pipes overhead. The central console glowed pale blue, the same sterile shade that had haunted her since the first night she stepped inside. Every corridor behind her was locked, sealed by heavy gates, forcing her toward the one place she had avoided for weeks, the experiment hall. Jonas's voice echoed in her earpiece, sharp with panic. They've closed the city grid. You have maybe 15 minutes before the sweep. You need to choose now. His words were clipped, as if he already knew which option he wanted her to take. She didn't answer him. Her hands hovered over the console, over the two illuminated symbols pulsing in slow, deliberate rhythm. The left icon, labeled Release, meant dismantling the cognitive suppression network, letting the subjects inside the archive remember who they were, what had been done to them. The right icon, labeled Maintain, meant sealing those memories away forever, locking them back in the mental cages that had kept them compliant. The hum from the ceiling deepened, as if the building itself leaned in to listen. If you release it, the city will burn, Jonas warned, his tone turning almost pleading. People don't survive sudden truth. Not at this scale. You'll turn the streets into a madhouse. His argument was a familiar one, Dr. Havel had said almost the same words in their first meeting. But Marina could still see the eyes of the subjects through the glass panels in the ward corridors. Eyes that looked hollow until you stood close enough to see the flicker of awareness, the silent plea for something they couldn't name. She pressed her palms to the edge of the console, her breath steady despite the pounding in her chest. If we keep it in place, she said quietly, we're no better than them. And if you tear it down, you become them, Jonas shot back. She thought of the last week, how every lead had turned into a dead end, every ally either gone or turned against her. The archive wasn't just a facility. It was the spine of the city's control, and she had broken her way into its heart. But now that she was here, the simplicity of the choice had dissolved into something far heavier. Behind her, a faint metallic scrape echoed from one of the sealed corridors. She turned sharply, but saw nothing. Then another sound. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming closer. From the shadows emerged Dr. Havel, his lab coat streaked with dark stains, his expression calm in a way that felt rehearsed. You've made it farther than anyone, he said, his voice almost gentle. But you're not the first to stand where you're standing. He glanced at the two icons, then back at her. Do you want to know what they all chose? No, she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. I want to know what happened after. His lips curved into a small, knowing smile. They all thought they were saving someone. None of them walked out of here. He stepped closer, and for the first time she saw the faint tremor in his hands. You think you're choosing between freedom and control. You're not. You're choosing who gets to decide which memories matter. The lights above flickered once, then steadied. The countdown timer on the console's edge ticked from 14 minutes to 13. Jonas's voice returned, harsher now. Marina, do it. Don't listen to him. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the damp chill of the room sink into her bones. Havel's words struck something deep, not because they were manipulative, but because they felt close to the truth. Every decision in this place seemed designed to trap you in the illusion of choice. The footsteps came again, but this time from the opposite corridor. A group emerged, their faces pale and eyes unfocused, subjects, but not fully themselves. Two of them carried makeshift tools that could have been weapons. They stopped just short of her, staring as if waiting for an order. Marina realized they weren't here to stop her. They were here to see what she would do. Havel's voice lowered. They'll remember everything if you release it. The pain, the betrayals, the things they did under influence. Some will survive it. Some won't. That's your legacy. Jonas's voice in her ear overlapped his, louder now. Hit maintain. Seal it. Walk away while you still can. Marina opened her eyes and looked at the two icons again, their glow casting long shadows across her fingers. The hum in the air had become a deep vibration, almost a heartbeat. The subjects shifted uneasily, one of them muttering something under their breath she couldn't quite hear. She thought of the month that had brought her here, the messages hidden in old photographs, the allies who had vanished into the archive's wards, the way every truth had been wrapped in another lie. The decision felt like standing on the edge of a building in the dark, knowing that whether you jumped or stepped back, the ground would give way anyway. She lifted her hand. The timer on the console read 11 minutes. This ends now, she whispered, though she wasn't sure to whom she was speaking. Her fingers hovered over the release icon. The subjects leaned forward. Havel's smile faltered. Jonas shouted something in her ear, but the words dissolved in static. Her fingertip touched the icon the instant her fingertip touched the icon. The entire atrium seemed to exhale. The blue glow flared to white, so bright it erased the edges of the room, and a low, resonant tone rose from the floor, passing through her chest like a wave. For a heartbeat, she felt weightless, as though the air itself had thinned. Then the sound fractured into thousands of overlapping whispers. They weren't voices in the air, they were in her mind. Faces flashed in rapid succession. The woman in the East Ward who clutched a paper bird, the boy who hummed to himself in the dark, the guard who had looked away when she passed. Memories unfolded inside her as if they were her own. Pain, fear, longing, betrayal. She stumbled back, pressing her palms to her head, but the torrent didn't stop. The subjects around her dropped to their knees, their bodies trembling, eyes wide as something unseen flooded back into them. One began to scream, a raw, animal sound, before collapsing into sobs. Another backed away slowly, whispering apologies to no one. Jonas's voice cracked through the static in her earpiece. What did you do? His words were ragged, disbelief threaded through them. They're not just remembering, Marina. The whole city is. His voice cut off mid-sentence. A new sound replaced it, distant but rising. Alarms from somewhere beyond the archive walls. Heavy metallic groans echoed through the building as security doors unlocked all at once. The subjects in front of her turned and ran into the corridors, some toward the exit, others deeper into the facility. Havel stood utterly still, his eyes fixed on her. You think you freed them, he said quietly, but you've only given them the weight of their own chains. His tone held no anger, only a strange, weary pity. Marina's legs felt unsteady as she stepped away from the console. Maybe it's not my job to carry their weight for them, she said, though her voice shook. The hum in the air began to fade, replaced by the rising chaos of footsteps, shouts, and the distant wail of sirens. She made her way toward the main corridor, but every turn brought new scenes that made her hesitate. In one room, a group of subjects clung to each other in stunned silence, their breathing shallow. In another, two men fought violently, blood already on the floor. The walls felt tighter, the air heavier. By the time she reached the ground floor, the front gates stood wide open. Outside, the night was alive with motion. Dozens of people stumbling into the streets, some crying, some laughing, others running with no destination. The city skyline beyond was fractured by sudden blackouts, whole districts going dark as if retreating from what was coming. Jonas's voice returned, barely above a whisper. They'll come for you now. Both sides. You understand that, right? I didn't do this for them, she said. I did it because someone had to decide the lies were worse than the truth. She ended the call before he could answer. As she stepped into the street, she caught sight of a woman leaning against a lamppost, her face pale, but her eyes alert. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, two strangers sharing the same invisible weight. Then the woman turned away and disappeared into the crowd. The archive loomed behind Marina, its windows dark except for the faint pulse of light in the experiment hall. She didn't know if the systems inside were still active or if what she had unleashed could ever be contained again. Somewhere far off, a building exploded, not from fire, but from the sudden crush of people flooding into it. The sound echoed across the city like a warning. Marina began walking with no clear destination, her mind a tangle of questions she didn't want to face yet. Had she given people a chance at freedom, or had she condemned them to break under truths they couldn't carry? Would they rebuild something better, or claw each other apart in the rubble? She thought of Havel's final words, about deciding which memories matter, and realized the choice might not have been hers to make after all. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, washing the streets in glistening reflections. People moved around her in every direction, some colliding, some embracing, some staring blankly as if waiting for instructions that would never come. Every face was different, but each carried the same raw uncertainty she felt inside herself. She reached an intersection and paused. To the left, the road descended toward the river, where the lights of the industrial quarter flickered weakly. To the right, it climbed toward the old districts, where narrow alleys could swallow someone whole. Straight ahead lay the central square, and beyond it, the government towers that had fed the archive for decades. Her body ached from exhaustion, but she knew stopping wasn't an option, not yet. Behind her, the archive's hum had faded completely, leaving only the restless noise of the city as it woke into its new, unfiltered reality. Somewhere in that noise, she thought she could still hear the whispers, not words now, but fragments of emotion, slipping in and out of her thoughts. She didn't know if they would fade with time, or if she had opened herself to something permanent. She took a slow breath, tasting the damp air, and stepped forward into the crossroads. The rain blurred the lines of the street, erasing the boundaries between one path and another. She didn't look back again.